Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, whatever you happen to view this. So we have our last week. So hopefully everybody took advantage of the discussion board last week. So if you don't remember what that was your amnesty week. You get to tell me a story. So this week I have a couple of pieces we'd like to do. So we're going to show you a toolkit that has some graphical user interfaces in it. And we're also going to talk about object-oriented programming, which we're kind of approaching that idea, so we're going to get a little closer. So there is a discussion board posting this week. So pick one of these ideas. So there's a link to an article. So you need to pick one of those and elaborate on it. So you need to find another article then about that and Python. And how do these things work together? So that should hopefully make some sense when we get done today. So this is our last week. So we will have a real quick review on Thursday of what's going to be in the final. The final will be available for both on-campus and off-campus students, will be available online. I believe I have the due date for it Thursday of finals week. I will double check and make sure on Thursday to look at that. And the reason we do that is that way it gives us time to grade everything, put in grades and such before the end of the semester. So this week we're talking about the idea of a graphical user interface. We're looking at, so if you've read the material, we looked at that. And we're also going to talk about something called objects and methods. And we haven't quite got to objects yet. So I'm going to pause the recording and allow you to go click on this same link because it won't record the video correctly. All right, so we're talking about creating objects based on a class. So if I'm going to do something like this and I want to create a program for, maybe I know that everybody on our campus, we need to have some form of way to work with you in terms of salary and behaviors and other things. So I might create a class and I might call it employees. So employees is the class. An individual person is an object. So the object might be me. But we know that everybody in that class has some very common characteristics. So what kind of things as a group of employees do we have that we might want to include in our attributes? So what do you have when you go to work? What is an attribute of you that relates to work? Well,
I don't understand what you mean. There could be a lot of things.
there are a lot of things. So how,
are you talking about? What, like, I'm on time. Actually, I'm early. I always try to be 10 to 15 minutes early.
So yeah. So we'll get there. So last name, first name, and we know those aren't really good identifiers because there could be two people with the same John Smith or something. So maybe an employee number. Date of hire. Forklift certified. And that might be like a yes/no box. So some people are, some people aren't. So we could put a whole lot of pieces in there. So we could put in your sex. We could put in, maybe for some reason we need to identify your height. All those kinds of things are what make an individual object out of that. So we have this class called employees, and we create that class. And then we run a constructor every time we hire somebody new, and we create an employee. So we've got a group of objects then that are all employees. But let's go just a little step further. So we also know here at Peru, we also have a student group. Oh. So does class students, is it going to have very similar characteristics? So some of these are going to be the same, some of them aren't. So we may need to think about how we can put people into both of them. Because do we have students who are also employees? And we have employees who take classes. In fact, we encourage our employees to take classes. It's one of our better benefits is that you can take classes really cheaply. So if I break down people, this is one way we could do that. Because what we're going to do is we're going to create a group of people. In addition to this group, we also are going to create some methods in there, things that these people can do. So maybe it's clock in, out. That might be a method we use. Maybe they can drive a car, whatever it is that you were going to hire them to do, fix a boiler, whatever it happens to be. Those are all methods. In other words, I can say this is what you can do. And you give it a method on how it can accomplish that. So, students would have similar types of attributes. So these describe my object. These are things my object can do. So, if I change that and I said, let's create, because now we're making cars, or the example of there, class cars. Well, we know that cars have certain attributes. So they might have a make, a model, a color, a type. So maybe like, a sedan or a two-door. But we also know that they also have methods so that they can drive forward, run air conditioning, drive backwards. So we're giving a attributes. So in the way we program now, we have this generic class up here called cars, and we create a bunch of instances, and each instance is its own separate object. And we store all this information about each one of those. So these are kind of like those functions that we worked on, but now we're doing these functions on steroids. We're creating these classes. And as we create classes, we can actually inherit permissions and different items back and forth. And it might make more sense in cars, because maybe we know that there's some differences between cars and pickups and commercial trucks. Would we agree there's differences in those? So we could create a class vehicle, and then we create objects class car. We could do a class truck or pickup maybe, and then we could do a class semi maybe, or something, a bigger truck. And what I can do is the items that are the same, I put in this big outside class, my super class. They inherit all of that down into the car, the pickup, and then these would have items that are only for that particular device. So class pickup might have a winch. That would be an attribute. Most cars don't have a winch on it. Most pickups don't have air brakes. So those kinds of attributes are separate. So we take our base class and then we call a subclass car or pickup or class semi. It inherits all of these pieces and adds its own unique items in there. So classes and this idea of objects are really, really powerful. So those methods, those things it can do, let's see if I can get this to launch. All right. So this seems a little abstract until we actually see what it looks like. So let me give you an example of one to maybe make it look a little. File new. All right. So take over the whole screen here. So this is in Python. So this is from a chapter we're not going to get to, so don't panic. But what we're doing here is we created a class called student. And inside of that class called student, we created a couple of things. So we're going to give it a name. We have these functions inside of there. Get name, set score, get average, get high score. We have some of these constructors, the string representation of the student. So we have a couple of pieces in there. These are all, so we do have functions, but those functions are only relevant to objects of this class student. So in this, our main is pretty short. So we create a list, we shuffle them, and we put out our list of students. So let's do, just to kind of see what this looks like. Sure. All right. So this says, we didn't give them names, we're just giving them name 5, 2, 3. So this is an unsorted list of the students in there. Here's their test scores. So there's not a lot going on here other than we've rearranged the list and we printed it out. But we have the ability to do more actions with that. So we could then grab average scores. We could write a piece of code that says, hey, I need to do this. These students, each one of these is an individual object. So name 1, name 2, name 3, name 4. Those are all individual objects. What's nice, with only 5 students in there, could we write a procedural code that could handle 5 students? Yeah. We could do that pretty easily. But this, we're not limited. We could put 1,000 students in there, or 10,000, and it's not going to make a lot of difference to this code, quite frankly. So here it says we're going to put 5 students in it. I could change that to 500, and it doesn't make a difference. It created 500 objects, and it put them in there. So this is a very powerful tool to start using this idea. So I want us to be aware of what object-oriented is. We're not going to get into it very far at all. So I just want you to be aware of what we can do with it there. One. Nope. Not the right one. Alright. So I have a couple of different videos in here I encourage you to go watch and take a peek at. So this time we're looking this chapter mostly talks about this idea of graphical user interfaces. Well, where they're starting, load slow thing. All right, so in this particular case, what we're trying to do is create kind of this graphical user environment. Well, that's great, but it's not really a native Python piece. We have to go outside of our world, and we actually have to get a couple of different pieces. So in this case, they use something called EasyFrame. So this piece of code is important also. So there are hundreds of different models out there for GUIs that you can find. A lot of them are free. So in this case, this created a class called Tax Calculator. So sets up the window and the widgets, and then it gives you some hints about how you're going to create this piece. So it says label and field for income, label and field for the number of dependents, a command button, label and field for the tax. So what we're creating is something that looks like this. You put in gross income, you put in dependents, you push the compute button, and then it says, here's what your total taxes were. If only taxes were that easy. So this one kind of holds your hand a little more. And I think what I'm going to do, well, let's look at this one first for a little bit, and then I'll discuss it. So the event handler method for the button we have to complete. So obtains the data from the input field, uses them to compute the tax, which is sent to the output field. So here's our constructor to launch our main function. Our main function says tax calculator main loop. So it's going to come up here and begin to create an instance of this tax calculator. All right, so let's take a look at, see if I can make this any bigger. I think I can. There we go. There we go. Nope. There we go. All right, if I can hit enough buttons eventually, we can see those. All right, so standard deduction of $10,000, an exemption amount of $3,000 per exemption, and a flat tax rate of 20%. So again, it'd be really nice if our taxes were this simple. Unfortunately, that is not the case. So we want to start looking at this and see if we can come up with some of the pieces we need. So we have a class calculator. We know that we're calling that. So this self, this sets up the window and the widgets. And notice, because it's a constructor, it's got those underscores front and back. It's going to run when it gets called. So it'll automatically run that. So we get a couple of hints here about label and field for the income. So because it says self, so that'll call the object we're creating. So we created, we're calling it self, and we're using that method. So if I look here, at some point we're going to have to create a add label field. And that add label field, we're going to create it using, so this is going to put a label on our field that we're creating. So we need to position it. So let's just put that at the top, row 0. Can't type. 0. And column. Now, I will say with this, it's actually, it's really a variable. We're passing in that location, but we can actually maneuver it around depending on the frame size and other things we put in there. So we're creating a button. Income field. Value equals 0.0. Row equals 0. And we'll move it one column over. All right, column equals 1. All right, so we created a field for that gross income. So if I look over here, we just created this, gross income, and we moved it over 1, and then we created this text field. So that's where we were headed there. All right. Chunk. All right. So label and field for the number of dependents. Well, that's going to be very similar. So self.add label equals, what do we call them, dependents. And we're going to put that down one row. Row equals 1, column equals 0. So in other words, we come down and we still stay on the left-hand side. Depth field, shrink, self.add integer value equals 0, row equals 1, because we're down one row, so we're 2 rows down, or 1 row down, and then we're going to move it over the same way we did before, column equals 1. So now we just created this line for dependents. And then we need to create a command button. So that command button is going to be very similar. Add button. Now, remember, these are all coming from this framework we've created. Text equals, what do we call it? Compute. Compute. And then we say where this button is going to be. So row 2. And I think we want to put that more in the middle. So row 2, column 1. An equal sign. So now we created a button, but we haven't made it do anything yet. Does that make sense? Alright. So now we have to put a command in there. Is equal to self.compute tax. So we're going to have in here somewhere a compute tax, and we're going to call that then when we do that. So when that button hits, it's going to go up and grab the information we have in those fields, and then it's going to create that. So next we have the output of that. Maybe doing this right after tax time wasn't a good time. So we're going to move that down another row. So it's going to be on row 3, column 0. Row equals 3, column equals 1. Now we're going to add a couple of more items in here. Just because we can pass them in. So precision equals 2 decimal places. And because we don't want people to be able to manipulate, we're going to use the state function to say that it's read only. So in other words, people can't change that easily. All right. So next, we're going to have to figure out how to get this tax created. Ugh. All right. So we're going to compute tax. So it obtains the data from the input field and uses them to compute the tax, which is sent to the output field. Okay. So we know we have a couple of different things we need to get. So we know we need income, and that's going to be equal to self.income field that we created earlier. And to get that, then we're going to use the method getNumber. All right. Our number dependence we've got our income, we've got our number of dependents. So we need a couple of values in here. So exemption equals, bless you, 3,000 I think it was. And then we have our standard deduction. Bless you. Is equal to 10,000. And so then we have to figure out tax. Ugh. All right. So tax is going to be equal to, we know it's going to start with our income and slowly get smaller. Not even that small, slowly. So it's going to be minus that number dependence times, what do we call it, exemption, times the exemption minus that standard deduction. And then we're going to take that whole thing. So that gets you, what this piece here gets you is your taxable income. And then we know that our tax rate is a nice handy 20%. So we get information in, we can create it. We know that we're going to have a tax rate. And then we need to pass that out back into that tax field. So self.tax field. There we go. And we're going to use the set number. And we're going to do one more little function in there. So, because we could end up with a negative amount in some weird circumstances, this draconian government doesn't allow tax refunds. So it's going to say what your tax amount is, and it's going to be the max value of either the tax or 0. So let's take a look at this now. Let's see what's going to happen when we actually run it. So I'm going to pop open the instructions. So this is what it should look like when I run this. Get my box up here. Okay. So I'm going to run it and see how badly I did. Invalid syntax, which line 36. Probably Text equals amount. Row 3, column 0. What did I do here? Text equals amount stolen. Row equals 3, column equals 3. What did I miss here? Yeah, that may be it. Let's try to run it again and see if it comes up with a different error. No. Still stopping on that one for some reason. Text equals column 0. What have I done? Text equals total tax. Row equals 3, column equals 0. Oh, hey, duh. I forgot to put the equal sign in. Good gravy. Those are hard to spot sometimes. Oh, attribute error. Did I spell something wrong? Oh, I did. Okay. Line. Tax calculator object does not have. Show me a line. Show me a line. Okay, don't do that. Where did I put that in there? What happens when I talk and type at the same time? Some bad things happen. Line 23. Alright, I'll see how many more typos I have here. Launch. Why am I not seeing? Oh, there it is over there. Hang on. Drag this around a little bit. Alright. So, we got a little closer. So now it says gross income, dependents, and notice this is grayed out. We can't change that amount. So, let's put in 65,000. I have 3 dependents. Let's see if our compute works. Yay, total amount tax, I don't know how that got in there, $9,200. Oh. Alright, let's check it with, if I have 1 dependent, 10,000. If I have 0 dependents. Now, we don't have a lot of checks in here, because here's something interesting to try. So let's see what happens if I try -3. Huh. You can actually go the wrong way, so we probably need some checks in there. But this is what we can do with a kind of a graphical interface GUI program. So this one's one called EasyFrame. So this will calculate, and you can create something like this. And it's pretty easy to do. There's not a lot of hand holding you need, other than being able to type the word label correctly. But you can change some of these around and see what happens. So if we come in here, and we said, oh, you know what? I really think that dependents should be in row 7. And then I run this. So now gross income, and oh, we have a weirdity because it's outside of our area where that title is. So go back to row 2. So notice dependents jumped down there when we did it. So if we wanted to, let's see, total amount, we want to keep that one. So if I didn't care if you could change that column, that amount. So now notice it's not grayed out, and I can actually type in it. Now it's still going to compute when we're done, but that's just kind of a handy way to say, nope, don't type in here. And again, if we did this, if I had 0 income, in theory it would come out and give me, so if I took out that max value in my tax deduction, so if I just said, we just sent back out the value tax, and we had 0, I gotta run it first. Hang on, be helpful. Okay, so now I computed it with 0 income, 0 deductions, and it's going to say, hey, you have a negative $2,000 in taxes. So, and if I put in 50 dependents, so we don't have anything to limit that, it said, hey, you should get $332,000 back in taxes. So you do have to look at those, because you think, who would ever put in negative 50 dependents? Well, you never know. So now we have 0 income, and we're going to owe $28,000 in taxes. So you always have to think about what's the worst people could do in here. So that's our first example with this GUI. In this particular kit, there's tons of other ones out there you can use. So let me check this one and see if I've probably now messed it up enough that it won't work on the check, but we'll see. Quickly, ever so quickly. Oh, so that actually managed to pass. So I thought I might have screwed it up by putting enough in there. So the other piece of this program, and you go, well, there's another program up here. So this, if you take a look at it, this is really part of that interface that we're using. So if you look, this is probably 1,200 lines of code, and that's what creates those radio buttons and other things. So you're certainly welcome to look through it and kind of see how these are being created. So this one, the author of the textbook actually modified it, and then it's using a tkinter, which is another available set. And actually, if you're in Java and other languages, you can use that quite a bit too. So it actually uploads another graphics package different than the Turtle to create these graphics. All right, so let's look at one more, and then I think we'll do something interesting. Let's see, which one is 8.3? I'm trying to remember what it is. 8.3. Go slow thing. Alright. This one converts between Celsius and Fahrenheit. So that's going to be very, very similar to the program that we just did. And then it's going to give you some tools. So this one's pretty easy. In fact, let's do this. Let's make this one extra credit. Let's do extra credit. Let's look at number 8.2. Can we do it in that amount of time? Maybe, possibly. All right, this one is a modification of a program we already did. So a long time ago, we created a program that took a ball bouncing and said, all right, we're going to calculate the total distance a ball travels if you threw it up in the air and it bounced and all these different things. So we're going to create it so it's got, now instead of being at a command line, it's going to have a box that says initial height, bouncing its index, in other words, what fraction of the original bounce, how many bounces you're allowed to complete, and then it's going to have a compute button. So, I'll make this go away temporarily so we can see a little better. Alright, so, drag that down. Alright, so our program is already here, and they give it to us, or an example of one. So, height, bounciness, distance, bounces, for each pass, so in other words, each bounce. So we get all of the pieces on the original bounce program. So we then have one that's bouncy with GUI. So now we're going to do something, and in fact you could run this if you really wanted to. Make it a little bigger so it runs down there. And it's going to run and say, okay, but here's what I'd rather do, is we'd rather figure out how to put this into here. And so, again, they've given you some items here. Define the following fields, event handler, define main. So, kind of working our way up, main isn't going to change. So what this does, so our main, bouncy GUI, main loop, alright, perfect. So let's come out here. We're going to create a class called Bouncy GUI, Graphical User Interface. So we have a couple of things we need to do. So we have to compute that distance. So this is going to be very similar to what we had back here. So we're going to define compute distance. So stealing this liberally from our previous for x in range of bounces, in other words, the number of bounces we're going to take, so it's going to go that many times, equals total plus height. Height then is equal to height times our bounciness index. And then total equals total plus height. So in other words, this really, every time we allow it to bounce, there's a vertical component down and a vertical component up that we're adding in there. So the total, we're adding the height once, then we're computing what the next height's going to be after it bounces, and then adding that in. So, and then we're going to return total. So total bounces comes back out of our function there. So here we're going to look at the frame. How are we going to set up this frame? So easy frame, initiated, so it's going to take self and a title called bouncy. The following fields. All right. So we need a self height field. So self.add label. Well, I can't type label today. What do we call that? Initial height. And we're going to put that on the first row. Row equals 0. Column equals 0. Backwards. Alright, so if we've added the label, then we're also going to have to add a field. Self-height field. And that's going to equal self.add. So this one we're just stealing out of value equals 0.0 because it's going to be a float. Row equals 0. Column equals 1. And so what we're just building, if you were to try to run it right now, let's see if it'll actually build anything or not. It's probably just going to pick up. No, it's not going to show it to me that much. Alright. So what you were building there is just that initial piece for the alright, self-index field, so the number entry. So in other words, that index. And it's going to look really familiar. So we're going to do a self.add label. And then our text is going to be bouncing this index. And then so it's going to be on row 2 and column 0. Float field, value equals 0.0, row equals 1, column equals 1. Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay. So then we're going to go down and do the same thing for the number entry, for number of bounces. So, watch this though. I'm going to copy. And then just change my text really quickly. So text equals number of balances, but this is going to be row 2, but still column 0. Now, I'd like to say I could just copy this next one, but, well, we can to a certain degree. Self dot. Now, here's where we're going to put in an integer. Add integer. So it is actually very similar. Value equals 0, row equals 2, column equals column maybe 1. Yes, 1. Sorry, losing my brain power there for a second. All right, and then we're going to have the distance of our initial throw. So add label. Total distance. row equals 4, column equals 1, or 0, far left column. And then we need to create self.distance field. And that's going to be equal to then add float field value equals 0.0 row equals 4. So now we're all the way down to 4th row, or are we on 5? That'd be 4, right? Let me think here. I got screwed up here. So row 0, row 1, row 2. Okay, hold on a second. This should be 3. I was trying to make this more complicated than it should have been. Alright. Self-distance. Number of bounces. Total distance. Row 4. Okay. That one should be value 0.0, row 4. I think I have one of these off here. Hang on a second. Column 1. Alright, so we've created all of those buttons and put them somewhere. Now we need to figure out what happens when we compute this distance. So, event handler, so in other words, this is going to do something when we hit that compute button. So, height is going to equal self.height field dot get number. So it's going to grab the value in that particular field. Index is going to equal self.index field dot get number. Our bounces are going to equal bounces field dot get number. And self.distance field is going to equal, hold on, which one have I missed here? Bounces, index, distance, that's the one I'm missing first. Equals compute distance, height index, height, and it's going to pass in index, and it's going to pass in bounces. And then we do the self.distance field dot set number distance. So we have to send this off to calculate it somewhere else. And we've done that up top, right? Compute distance. All right. Well, let's do this. Let's see how horrible this is going to run in a second and what I've missed here. Oh, again, I forgot to put an equal sign on row 53. A little more room to see this. 53, 0 column equals 1. Try it again. Bouncy GUI object has no. Which line is that? Line 45. What am I doing here? No. Self.index field self-dot index field. What have I done crazy with that one? Self-dot index field. Apparently can't type. Self.index field equals self.add float field value. Now I have an extra one. Okay. 950. Come back over here. Okay, there we are. All right. So we got it to work after my mangled typing here. So initial height, let's see what happens. So what I don't see is I am missing a compute button. Hang on. Alright, so what has happened to my compute button? Alright. So my compute button event handler. Where did I put a compute button in here? Did I not put a compute button in there somewhere? It should be label. Alright. Text, initial height, bounciness, number of bounces, total result. Now I need to put in one more button in there. Alright, hang on. I'll do that. Text equals compute. Column equals 1. So I'm just going to make it bigger. Self-compute distance. Alright. Make sure we got a parenthesis on the end of it. Alright, let's see what happens now. Columns. Yeah. Alright, so now I have a bigger button. So now I could put in a value. So initially it's 10 units. Its bounciness index is 0.5. Number of bounces 10. And we have some kind of error. Alright, so I will leave it at this point. We will solve this on Thursday. And it's giving me a hint there, so I've mistyped in value in there somewhere. Alright, so yes, thank you for sharing that it's got an issue. Alright, so we will meet on Thursday. We'll finish this one up, and then we'll do a review over the final and get you guys out of here for the last day this semester.